I'm going to make the argument that California is the co-capital, co-equal capital for Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. Whether you have a Cal exit or not. And here's my rationale. When you look at recent legislation that the state of California has had that essentially has forced a lot of companies to make the California laws as their legal template for the nation. When you look at the internet consumer protection and privacy legislation that California has had, when you look at the emissions standards for automobiles and possible talks of cap and trade and other legislation that ties into environmental issues, when you look at recently with the Governor Gavin Newsom saying that by a certain year that all athletes at state colleges in California, public state colleges, must be paid, and also giving players, most likely giving players the right to unionize in the state of California at California colleges, public colleges. You know, that's changing things for the automotive industry, for the energy sector, for all people who manufacture and deal with transportation, logistics, those types of things, supply chain. It's changed privacy laws and consumer protection laws when it comes to companies like Facebook and many other companies that deal with consumer information, especially if you sell consumer information to other people. Microsoft, a lot of companies basically had to say, look, our national policy as a company, as a corporation, is going to be based on the California model. The NCAA, let's see what's going to happen with the NCAA as a governing body of college sports, with the California rule on paying players, compensating players of some sort, and allowing players to maybe unionize and collectively bargain with the university and maybe even the NCAA. So a lot of these things make California very unique and gives it a lot of leverage, in combination to the fact, you know, it's the largest population in the state, in the nation, with about 40 million people. If California were a sovereign country right now, independent, their GDP would be at a minimum $3 trillion per year GDP, a $3 trillion economy, if not more. And that would put California, in the likelihood, if they became a sovereign nation, anywhere between the third to the fifth largest economy in the world. So they would be up there with China, United States, Japan, Germany, India, and one of those nations in that bottom portion of the top five, they would replace as the top five largest world economy, and they would be a G7 nation right now if they were a sovereign state. So their economic power, their population size, the legislative power that they have, that basically shifts the legal landscape, the legislative landscape, rules and policies for many companies, for many corporations, for many industries. California has a lot of sway. California has a lot of pull. Now, recently, just today, Governor Gavin Newsom said that basically, since the states can't really depend on the federal government to supply the PPEs and other materials with coronavirus COVID-19, and since basically all these different states and all these different governors basically are bidding against each other to acquire these materials, because the federal government was not able to procure, did not take the action to make sure that the nation had enough stockpiles months ago, and the federal government isn't being the most proactive even presently right now. So the Governor Gavin Newsom said that basically California will be purchasing equipment and materials like a nation state, that basically they're going to be acting as if they're independent. They're not going to look to the federal government, wait on the federal government. They're not going to look at themselves as being a part of the United States and under the federal government. They will be purchasing materials like they're their own country. So specifically in dealing with Corona, that's going to give California a lot of leverage over a lot of other states. But moving forward, if California were to take other measures like these in more normal times and everyday operations and affairs that take place, how would that change things, California against the rest of the nation and the federal government? And how would that change California's placing in the rest of the world? Another thing on the judicial front, a lot of times with the Ninth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit Court of the United States, a lot of people like filing certain cases with the Ninth Circuit because it's seen as more of a left-leaning court, and if you want a certain ruling in your favor, take it to the Ninth Circuit. So moving forward, when we look at economics, business operations, legislation, judicial matters, California basically is going to have a pull from the West Coast on the direction that the nation will go because it has a lot of influence. And if you were someone who was wanting to shape business practices, to shape legislative policy, to shape judicial matters, from reparations to environmental matters to education to infrastructure to energy policy to a lot of different things, putting influence politically, economically, socially, legally in the state of California. Basically, you can lobby in and lobby towards the state of California, just like how people lobby on K Street in Washington, D.C. So that's why I say that very likely moving forward, the state of California could be viewed as the co-equal capital of the United States of America. So for any type of lobbying, any type of initiatives, any type of change that you want to see in the country, Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, Washington City is not maybe the only lobbying location to look to. California should be something that you should also look to if you want to have your interests met and if you want to see change take place over the country, even though California is a state, not a country. Now, I know a lot of people will say things that have been happening in California about the affordability, the quality of living, the wealth and income disparity in the state, the homelessness that you have in many cases, especially in Los Angeles, Skid Row, and that, yes, California has been shedding residents with the migration that's been taking place in the country because a lot of people can't really afford to live. But there's going to be other people that will be able to afford to live there. And that approximately 40 million population, and the size of that economy, and the business and the industry, the influence of the Ninth Circuit, those things are not necessarily going to go away overnight. Long term, we can see how they'll change over time. But right now, in the pretty near future, that weight and that gravitas and that influence, that pull, is not going to go away anytime soon. So, like I say, for the future, look for the possibility of how California could be a mechanism to move the country and not simply appealing to the national politics in Washington, D.C.